Hi, my name is David Heckman. I'm here with Professor Richard Schell to talk about his new book, Springboard. Richard, welcome.
Thank you, Dave.
First question, Richard, you're really well known for your work in negotiation and persuasion, so why write a book about success?
Well, Dave, it's been a long journey. The materials on success actually preceded the materials on negotiation and persuasion. I've been interested in success probably since I was in my 20s, and it also feeds into a real passion I have, which is in all my teaching, to help students and executives bring more self-awareness to their practice, whatever it is, and the subject of success allows me to do that really directly.
Here at Wharton, you teach three very different audiences about the topic of success and challenge them to think about what is success, that being our Wharton undergrads, our MBAs, and our senior executives in our advanced management program. What do you see as the differences in the way that the audience reacts to the question?
Well, that's a great question. They're at very different stages of life, and so each one of those groups has a sort of different question in their head when you ask them, what do you mean by success? So for an undergrad, they're standing right on the edge of adulthood and very anxiously awaiting the real world after doing school for 16 years. And for them, it really is the first time to encounter what their life goals might consist of. That sort of begin thinking about family, begin thinking about career, begin thinking about how to balance those things. And I think in asking that question for them, I'm able to, in some ways, set their minds at ease, that they don't have to answer that question all at once, and that their lives are kind of more like an experiment than a test. For the MBAs, it's a little bit further down the road, and I think they have a more career-directed focus to that question. They're all thinking very, very directly about the kind of professional niche that they're seeking and what kind of success that may hold for them. And then for the executives, it's much different. The senior executives are much more mindful of issues like family, of issues like work-life balance, and the kind of mentoring that they can do for other people a little younger than they are, and help those younger people think about what a meaningful career might look like, or how they can carve out a life that will make sense to them. So at some levels, I'm teaching the executives how to be coaches as much as I am opening up a new subject for them.
Many people in our culture are chasing success goals of fame and fortune, yet you in your book sort of say that they could be traps. What do you mean by that, and how does your book help the reader define success for themselves?
Well, the culture, one of the points I make in the book is that whether we like it or not, our surrounding culture is going to create a lot of expectations for us. And when you filter that culture through the prism of a family and how you grew up and where you grew up and the peer group that you grew up around, you're going to have almost a hypnotic effect on what people think they ought to be pursuing. And with the media that we have and the celebrity culture that we have, it's very, very common to see people unconsciously adopt a frame of reference that if they're not famous, they're not successful. If they're not wealthy, they're not successful. And to, even when they know better, continue to behave in ways that give them this sort of underlying sense of dissatisfaction if they're not famous or rich enough. So a lot of what I do in the book and in the teaching that I do is to try to give people a chance to gain a little perspective on that. And that means looking at the sources of those early messages that they may have internalized and giving them a chance to make a few more choices about whether that sort of impulse toward getting recognition or the impulse toward making another $100,000 when they have choices about using their time other ways, whether they can gain more control over that. I mean, part of what I do is try to substitute new goals for the more automatic ones that our culture provides. And so instead of fame, I try to get people to start thinking about gaining respect. That means a smaller audience of people who know you better and giving you a sense of satisfaction from gaining the respect of that group as opposed to recognition from people you don't even know. And when it comes to the money side of things, I try to emphasize whatever your needs are that would relate to financial security for you and your family, and not just a status scorecard that people sometimes slip into when they just start counting their bank account zeros at the end of their net worth. So I think part of it is helping people wake up, that realize that they're being unconsciously influenced, and the other is to provide them with a more thoughtful alternative that, when they think about it, actually is something they'd much rather pursue.
In the U.S. Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson penned the words that we have the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Should he have edited those words to be the pursuit of personal success?
I don't know that the Founding Fathers had the word success in their normal vocabulary. Happiness was, though. And I think it's interesting if you look back at that event in our founding, because the original text said life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. And then Jefferson edited out property and wrote the word happiness over it. And I think it's a lot of cultural commentators think that single editing changed the course of American culture, because the word happiness is very ambiguous. I think it meant one thing to Jefferson. He was a Stoic philosopher. He followed a very strict regime in his life and got his joy from gardening and from intellectual pursuits. We've interpreted it, I think, to mean longer times at casinos and more elaborate vacations. So one of the things I try to do in the book is give people a chance to think more deeply about what happiness actually means. And it turns out it means three different things. The research shows it's a kind of momentary emotion that is something that people feel that's a good feeling. But it's also a kind of positive evaluation when you look back on a period of time and consider whether your efforts have been rewarded with some kind of achievement. But it's then finally a kind of satisfaction that comes with almost a spiritual dimension of awe, of appreciation of nature, of a sense of connection to nature and the world, and maybe even a deity. And those kinds of happiness feelings, I think, are the deepest of all. And so when you speak of pursuit of happiness, it's probably some mix of all those three things. But it's not, I don't think, the sort of simple metric that most people consider.
In your book, you describe an experience where you went to a conference about happiness, and a wise angel arrived, and he said that happiness is just three things: good health, meaningful work, and love. You have that, you're happy. Was he missing anything relative to success as you would define it?
Well, the guy I call the wise angel was really just a senior citizen who wandered into a Wharton seminar the faculty were giving on the relationship between income and the emotion of happiness. And I called him the wise angel because he was dressed in working man's clothes. He really didn't belong in the setting. And the question that he posed to the presenter was about as unacademic a concept of happiness as you can find, but very deeply felt and in many ways very wise. So I think good health is certainly a very important component of well-being, and meaningful work is something I talk at great length about in the book, because that's something I think that's well worth understanding and pursuing. And love, of course, is the foundation for everyone's personal life if you're going to sustain any kind of meaningful life. So he had a lot captured with that. But I think one of the things he missed that most people think of when they think of success is some sort of notable achievement. I think that people get a lot of satisfaction from achieving something significant that they try to set out, and that whether or not it's recognized, that's a sort of cherry on top. I think your sense of satisfaction comes from doing things well that are important to you. When they're recognized, that's sort of an extra benefit for that. But I think achievement is something that most people would consider pretty important when you get to the concept of success compared with just the concept of happiness.
Great. Another thing you mentioned in your book is the trade-offs between success and happiness. And now we live in a world that says, can't we have both?
I believe that there's only 24 hours in a day. We each only get to live roughly 32,850 days in a year, in a lifetime of 90 years. And how you choose to spend that most precious asset, time, does involve trade-offs. I think if you're going to be pursuing momentary happiness, for example, then you're probably going to be not working the sweat of your brow in some very labored way on some important achievement that you're trying to accomplish. And by the same token, there are moments when, if you're doing the right kind of work, you can have both a very strong sense of achievement and a very powerful and fulfilling sense of satisfaction. So it is the case that there are some things that we do where we hit a sweet spot, and we can feel both very positive emotions and also accomplish a great deal. But I think, the other half of that is you have to choose how to spend your time. And I think some people overdo the achievement side, and they don't remember that their own intellectual well-being and their emotional well-being is something, their family is something that they need to nurture. And other people focus on their personal lives, and at the end of the day may feel some frustration that they didn't achieve as much as they would have liked.
I think your book makes it very clear that success is definitely a journey and not a destination. Can you tell us a little more about your discovery of your own personal success?
Well, that's what my students always want me to talk about. I have them write a paper on what is success, and they say, well, Professor Schell, what's your theory of what success is? And I always resist it because I don't want them to sort of copy the teacher. I think it's their responsibility to come up with their own ideas. I mean, for myself, I think I had a very strong crisis in my post-college years. I was a son of a general in the Marine Corps who was the head of a military college, Virginia Military Institute. I became a pacifist as a result of the Vietnam War, so I had a very, very ruptured event in my young adulthood, breaking with all my family traditions. My grandfathers had both been in the military, too.
Actually, in your book, you used the word that you cut the narrative story of your life.
Right.
And I thought that was very powerful. It's a very powerful description to describe what you were going through.
Yeah, and I think whenever you face a crisis like that, as in my case, I really had to just do a 180-degree turn from everything I'd assumed success meant, because I was at the time enrolled to be a naval officer in college. I was going to graduate from college and go in the Navy, and to turn 180 degrees away from that toward being a pacifist and protesting the war that we were in at that time, it just makes it very difficult for you to remember who you are. And so for me, that crisis really ended up putting me on a journey where I just stopped working. I left the country. I traveled for a couple of years. I just went on a quest to see if I could figure out who I was and what I needed to do next. And so the book tells that story. It's a longer story than I have time to tell here, but I think we are in some sense defined by the conflicts we've overcome. And that story happens to be the conflict I overcame. And that gave me the seed of my passion for this subject. But I challenge students, I challenge executives to look into their own lives and identify the crises that have defined them, and to draw strength from that, and to draw direction from that. And I think that's one very good way to make some constructive use of the difficult times that you've had.
Great. When you wrote Springboard, who did you have in mind as being your audience or your reader?
That's a great question, because it's a very tough one. I thought at the beginning that I was going to write this book based on the course that I teach, which is a pretty simple idea. I have a course, I'll write a book. When I started getting into it, though, I realized that the course I teach is very intimate. It's very interactive. There's a lot of writing and my responding to their writing. And so with an audience that's reading a book, then you can't see the audience. I suddenly realized I had a different problem to solve in writing it. And as I wrote it, I actually began realizing that it wasn't just students that I was writing for. That's my typical audience as a teacher. But really anyone who finds themselves at a point in life where they need to make a transition. And it could be a student who's transitioning to adult life after undergraduate studies. It could be a graduate student who's transitioning to a professional level after graduate studies. But it could also be someone who's facing a crisis because they have to change their career and retool their goals and rethink who they are with respect to their work. It could be someone who's just coming off of a personal crisis and they have to think about who they are after a divorce or after the death of a loved one. Or finally, people who are coming into their retirement years and they have to, really consider what they're going to do with their life after they stop their sort of identified career. So I think it really is relevant for anyone who's asking the question, what should I do with my life next?
At the end of the book, you give a pretty good bibliography of other recommended readings, and you acknowledge that there's many other books on the market about success. What's different about yours?
Well, that was another crisis for me as I wrote the book, because I think over the time I drafted it, I wrote about 5 different kinds of books, each of which was one of the success types of books. So maybe by process of elimination, I wrote something that's different. But I think at the end I intended and I discovered that what I was writing was not a book about how to succeed like me, and not a book about the one true path to success, which you might read if you read a book on goal setting, or you read a book on follow your passion, or the many different kinds of one true answer kind of books. My goal in writing this book was really to help each reader discover for themselves their own authentic, legitimate, deeply felt goals with respect to what success means, and then look inside and assess the strengths, their personality, their motivations, their skills, as to how they can best utilize what God gave them to go ahead and achieve that success which they themselves had defined. So it really is a book about the reader, as opposed to a book about either me or some set of flawless answers to the question how to succeed.
As you work across this variety of audiences, beginning with undergraduate students up through senior executives, what do you see as their biggest obstacles to figuring out their path to success?
Fear. I think it's when I look into the eyes of undergraduates who are facing their first job after graduation, they are very, very anxious that they make the exactly right choice the first time out. And a lot of what I do when I speak to them individually is say, look, relax, just do something that interests you, and then use your early working life as an experiment to learn more about who you are as you work and what might interest you and what skills you have. And even senior executives, when occasionally I run into one who is at one of these transition points, and they usually come up to me during a break in our courses or at lunch or something, and they want some extra counseling, some extra chance to chat. And what I really see is fear, anxiety that some very defined part of their life that they know very well, that they're masters of, is coming to an end, and they look out into the future and they feel this sort of black hole in front of them as to what's going to happen next, what should I do? And so my effort in the book and in my courses is really to reassure and to provide encouragement, to be thoughtful, be a little fearless, take some courage, and put yourself in motion. There's if you follow professional ice hockey, which my wife and I occasionally do, there's a very good practice if you're trying to score in an ice hockey game. And basically the advice is keep shooting. And good things happen if you're in front of the net and you're swinging away trying to get the puck into the net. And I think life's like that. You get out there and just keep shooting, and things happen. People respond, new avenues open up, and you get a chance to find a new path.
In your book, you devote a fair amount of pages to a former student, now entrepreneur, named Eric Adler. Can you tell us a little bit about why he's so special?
Well, Eric, when I was writing the book and I was casting about for role models that I myself consider successful, Eric's name came right up front in my mind. I taught him, before I actually conceived the negotiation course, I taught Eric negotiation, and I taught him another core course. And while he was an MBA student, I got to know him. He was had been a high school teacher for 8 years before he came to Wharton, so he's sort of a non-traditional Wharton student. He then, while he was at Wharton, got very excited about a traditional business career in consulting, and left Wharton to pursue that. And I had never really thought that was the direction that he would end up in, or that I was hoping he would end up in. But people take their own path, and I was happy to see that he was engaged. But then a year or so later, I caught up with his story, and he had moved to Washington, D.C. He had become very dissatisfied with his consulting career. It just wasn't working out. And so he had the courage to quit. And I think he then went on to go back and knit together all the pieces of his life that allowed him to be the most successful person he could be. His parents were entrepreneurs. He decided he wanted to be an entrepreneur. He had a background in education, secondary education, so he started looking for how to pursue a business in secondary education. And he ended up creating a whole set of model public schools, but they're boarding schools for low-income students. They actually live residentially. And he's succeeded in finding a model to actually get those kids, who would otherwise not even graduate from high school, and he has 100% of them going to top colleges. So he really put together all the pieces that I see as going into the word success, as I define it. He created his own goals. He looked into his own past, found his own strengths, found his own experience, and came up with an original conception to how to implement that. And I think his life indicates this sort of trial and error, experimental model, rather than you go around the merry-go-round and you get the brass ring and game over, you're successful.
You mentioned one word in your description of Eric that sounds to me like it began with some level of dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
And do you think that's key?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the dangers of focusing on happiness. Happiness is this, if you think of that as the end state, I have to be happy. You're going to miss a lot, because it's from your dissatisfaction, it's from your unhappiness that you often get the motivation to do something new, something better, something more interesting, something more educational for you. You have to be willing to be unhappy in a relationship in order to find a better one. You have to be unhappy in a current job in order to take the plunge and seek a better one. So I think there's a lot of power in negative emotions that, at least if they're not overly negative for too long, are overlooked in the modern culture's sort of fascination with the whole idea that success equals happiness.
What do you see as the biggest aha moment that students have at the end of the success class?
I think, different audiences have different ahas. I think the undergraduates have a big aha because they suddenly realize this is something they get to define. And they've been in the business of checking boxes all through their lives, to go to great high schools, to go to take SATs, to get into a great school and college, and maybe even recruit into great firms for their first job after college. But I think they really begin feeling empowered when they realize that this is an opportunity, not something that they have to fear, and that the future is something they get to shape and craft. So I think that can be a big aha moment for them. I think for the older people, I think the aha comes with validating for them that life is a little bit more nuanced and rich than just their career achievements. I was teaching a course for bankers here on campus about a month ago. There were 250 bankers for the Stonier Business School here on campus. And I was making a point about sort of when you achieve someone else's goal in life, you recognize it because you don't feel any satisfaction from having achieved it. And this guy in the back raised his hand. He said, Richard, that's exactly right. I've been trying to get promoted for the last 3 years, and a month ago I got promoted, but I didn't feel any satisfaction from it. And I'm beginning to realize that I wasn't the promotion wasn't really my own goal. So I think the older folks sometimes suddenly realize that you have to live your own life, and sometimes you have to take a little time off to craft what your own goals are, and not just end up feeling empty when you achieve something everybody else wanted you to achieve.
One other question around personality and style. Do you see a correlation between certain personalities and styles and success? In other words, do you have to have a certain style and personality to be successful, or is success really an option for anyone?
Well, of course, back to the premise, you get to define success for yourself. So I think it's whatever personality you have, that will probably affect how you define it. And then that's the life you get to live. So I think if you looked at individual aspects of success, there probably are some correlations. For example, people who achieve more are probably more conscientious. They're more self-disciplined. They're more likely to follow through. On the other hand, people who are happier, they have more positive emotions, they have more sense of satisfaction. Those people often are those who are a little bit more emotionally intelligent, more self-aware, and maybe more open to novel experiences, and not so interested in controlling everything about their environment. So those are personality traits. They probably give you aptitudes for experiencing some dimension of success. But I think no matter what your personality is, you get to define the balance that you will call success for you. And so I think that's the unique aspect of it. You get to make your own adventure.
Richard, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for writing the book.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it.